Morning, good afternoon. For some of you, probably good evening. Where people are still ringing the doorbell, they're still coming in to the waiting room and they're being shunted right to today's webinar. Hi, Alyssa. Nice to see you. Jeffrey, oh my God, Bibiana. I see a lot of people here that I know. I'm David Lesondak. In case you don't know who I am, I've been anatomy trained structural integrator since 2003. And I apply my trade at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. And I want to welcome all of you coming into the room now to this open forum presentation and discussion on structural integration and manual therapy. We've had close to about 130 people register, and that just, it's great starting this out with so much joy. That is such a fantastic turnout, like I just can't tell you. So I'm gonna share my screen here so that you can see what's going on, and we're gonna just pop into this. Hit the play button. Oui, there we go. I sometimes do accents, get used to it. One quick rule of the road for everyone. So you're going to see a couple of presentations, and then that's going to be followed up by a long form discussion panel. So as you have thoughts, as you have questions, please use the chat box. Most of you are probably familiar with how to use the chat box, but there's an arrow to it. It pops up that little window, and you can type in any comments, questions, or concern. We will be watching this, and that will become part of the moderated discussion once we're done with the formal presentation portion. So once again, I'm David Lesondak. Thank you all for being here today to find out more about the International Consortium on Manual Therapies. So this is a group that has been together for going on collectively close to 3 years. Myself, I've been involved for a little over 2, in order to build a productive culture between different professions. I think in a circumstance that might be rare for a lot of you attending, I work in a department at a hospital that has on staff myself, a second structural integrator that we just hired this past fall, or last fall, 3 acupuncturists, a chiropractor, several psychotherapists, 2 naturopaths, 4 calling birds, 3 French hens. And it's an incredible environment to be in to take care of people. And what we're trying to do in the International Consortium on Manual Therapies is make it easier for us to talk to each other, for us to collaborate, and for us to basically do what we're all in this for, is to help people be better people, help people get along better, physically, mentally, emotionally, get them out of pain, keep them there, and to create a collaborative environment between ourselves and the people who research and study these kinds of things and move the ball forward in healthcare. Every one of you sitting here today knows what a difference you've had in individuals' lives on a level of their healthcare. And we're trying to move this forward as part of the ICMT for all these manual therapy professions. Now, it always starts with people. And I want to introduce you to the 2 people who are the main drivers of this program. Osteopath Brian Dengenhart, who has always been fascinated from the day that I met him at the first Fascia Research Congress, albeit briefly, to today, as how touch can affect the body so profoundly and in so many different ways and impact the health on the level of so many different systems. Yet we have so many different ways of looking at, talking about, strategizing how we're going to treat the body as manual therapists. And he together with one of my favorite guys, I've had a science crush on this guy for a long time. This is Paul Stanley, and I reference his research in almost every lecture that I give and every book that I write. And his goal is to make the kind of work that we do part of the front line of to the last resort. And let's face it, I had $5 for everybody who said, I've tried everything, and you're it. I would probably be driving a Tesla, and so would you. We'd really like to start to change that paradigm. And that's kind of what the ICMT is about. Now, these two guys had a much more productive collaboration at the first Fascia Research Congress, and that collaboration continued to this day in order to begin to put together what we're calling the International Consortium on Manual Therapies. And we're going to be having our first conference in the month of May. And we structural integrators have been invited to play a key role in the presentation of this forum. So that's what we're going to talk a little bit more about now. So when we're talking about manual therapies, we're talking about the following disciplines that you see on the right: chiropractic, massage therapy, osteopathy, physical therapy, structural integration. Of course, there are many other manual therapies and some that fall, in between these therapies. People who combine modalities, they're all welcome. But this is the baseline that we're starting from to begin to develop an equal multidisciplinary platform, create a collaborative environment, and actually begin to work towards having some kind of common language so that we can all understand each other better. And more importantly, the researchers who would like to study the results that we get and understand better why we get the results that we do, that we can all talk to each other in a way that is productive and collaborative rather than confusing and sometimes, unfortunately, combative. It's that elephant thing. It always goes back to the elephant thing, doesn't it? We all, massage therapists, fascial stretch therapists, structural engineers, whoever, we're all in some ways interacting with this organism. And very often we are seeing and touching and saying the same things, but not always in the same ways to understand each other. And I want to be clear here, we're talking specifically about the field of manual therapy. So this is a very particular sandbox. And as somebody who has played in the biomedicine sandbox for 12 years now, interfacing with other types of manual therapists, 80-person physical therapy departments, physical medicine, orthopedic medicine. It helps if you can speak the language, and it helps to simplify things enough to be understood by the other participants. So if we're just going to play in the manual therapy sandbox, and let's face it, structural integration can have profound effects across the entire human organism in many, many ways. But within the realm of manual therapy, I turned to this woman because she knows a thing or two about what we do. And it was page 15 of her book where she said, basically, it's a 10-hour cycle of treatment that balances myofascial relationships. Now, I can say that to any doctor, any surgeon, any chiropractor, any osteopath, and they get it. There's a lot more that could be said, but for the sake of this conversation, this is all that needs to be said. And of course, some people have 11 hours. Some folks have 12 hours. There's room there for all of us. But basically, a 10-hour cycle of treatment that balances myofascial relationships. But where do we start? Because as you saw, there's 5 different professions there: us, chiropractors, massage therapists, physical therapists. How do we begin to develop a collaborative, constructive environment? Well, by basically focusing in this first round, because I'm telling you, this is just the first of what's going to be something that is going to hopefully continue by the time our children's children are following in our footsteps. But we're going to start with defining what our procedures are across the professions, summarize those physiological theories, and then look at what the science actually says. How do we measure the effects? How can we better measure the effects from these things? And it's pretty much topic 1 and topic 2 that we're going to be showing you today, what myself and the team has spent over 2 years developing and hashing back and forth with the other professions. Okay, so I want to introduce to you the Structural Integration Working Group. I've heard some more doorbells. Just come on in. There'll be a tape later. You can catch up on what you missed, but thanks for being here today. And let's get going. So I want to introduce you to Katja Barsh. She recently contributed to a Delphi study on foam rolling. She's been a structural integrator since 2018. She is currently going after her PhD, and she is being mentored in her PhD by Robert Schleip. Batting number 2. James taught by Dr. Eiderolf back in 1974. He did the first funded study on structural integration in low back pain, and he's the current president of the Rolf Research Foundation. Batting third, Václav Kremen, who works at the Mayo Clinic. His specialty is neurology, but he is also a member of the European Rolfing Guild and a graduate of the Rolf Institute of Europe. And if you Google him, you can't Google somebody on PubMed, can you? But if you met him on PubMed, you'd see that he's contributed to over 6 pages of different kinds of scientific papers. He's a great brain heavy hitter. Bernie Landels, hailing from New Zealand, but currently an expat in UK. And she won the Rolf Research Foundation Award for Best, I was going to say research paper. My vocabulary has failed me. She won the paper for the best case study last year, I believe, in 2021. She also has a brand new book out for any of you young mothers out there, people you know who are clients, called Finding Their Feet. And it's a guide for parents to babies in movement, and it's a real gem. We're really lucky to have Bernie on board. Then there's me, in case you haven't heard of me. I've written a couple of books. The one on the left is going to be going into a 2nd edition later this year. The one in the middle is the first textbook on fascia aimed at working professionals, physicians, and other healthcare professionals. And it includes several chapters about structural integration and 3 or 4 chapters written by structural integrators, along with people like the Steckos, Jaap van der Wal, and so on and so forth. I also have a podcast because at, what is it now, 2.5 million podcasts, I decided we needed 2.5 million in one. And that's relevant because my guest today on the podcast is the person I'm going to be introducing next. And that's somebody that I think most of you know. That's the amazing and fabulous Liz Stewart, who is going to be serving as the facilitator during the conversational piece that we're going to have after the formal presentations. And by the way, just to sell it, because it's a story worth listening to, she's on the podcast today to talk about a recent experience she had helping, with the aid of a couple of other people too, a young mother and her 3-month-old in Ukraine. The 3-month-old was in shock and was not feeding, but they managed to turn that situation around. Highly recommended. It's an inspiring story. But let's get back to our story. What do we do with our hands? Why do we think it works? That's the essence of topic 1 and topic 2. So I'm going to turn things over here to our experts to show you the work we've been doing and how we've been presenting this to other manual therapists who don't do what we do, so you can understand what we're doing here. So Bernie is going to handle what we're doing with our hands, and Eric is going to explain the physiological mechanisms as to why we think it works. So take it away, Bernie. And I will stop sharing.
Thanks, David, and hi, everybody. Welcome to those that are joining us for the first time, and welcome back to some familiar faces from our last webinar. Those that are rejoining, you'll notice in my presentation I have added some of the keywords that or techniques that you mentioned last time. I still do have my list here, so please, if it isn't mentioned, if it hasn't made it onto the my presentation, it's not lost. I still have it. So what I'd like to do first is, if you just hold up your hands, whether it's your hands, whether it's your elbow. I think Laurie last time said, why don't we just call them instruments? So whatever part of the body that you use on a client or with a client, that's what we're looking at. And it's our hands and other parts of our body that we have in common with these other manual therapists. So what we're going to do today, I'm going to show you a little bit about or share what we shared with the wider team, the other manual therapists, because a lot of them had no idea what structural integration was. They'd heard of it, but really had no idea. And so there'll be that, and then a mix of I guess, our initial thoughts, which are developing from your feedback last time, and where we're heading to the conference in May. So please take the opportunity as I'm going to pop any thoughts in the chat box, so that at the end, while Eric presents, I can go through those, have a look, and then with Liz's help, we'll facilitate some discussion at the end. So we presented to the team that Dr. Ida Rolfe created structural integration, and we acknowledged that there are a lot of schools that developed out of that. So we explained the 10 series, or how some have gone to 12 or more. No, not more, somewhere in between that. And then sort of how the sessions are divided. Because one of the big things that are different is that we work with the whole person. We have a process or a plan, whereas they sort of, I guess, just target symptoms and, pain in local areas, where we acknowledge that, but we work the whole person. So let's have a look. We didn't define structural integration, and that's not our plan, but we wanted to give them an idea in terms of what we do. We work the fascia, we work the soft tissue, we manipulate it. And we have an approach, as I mentioned, that is more of a whole body approach rather than the symptom-based. We look at the global sort of functioning in gravity, again, rather than, assessing the range of movement of one joint. We're interested in the whole person. So if we look at back pain, for an example, you'll all be with me in that you've got 3 different people with back pain. No one approach is going to help them. We need to work through and peel back the layers. And we look at the whole body rather than just the back. So we explained the clinical goals, that we're looking to help improve people's posture, to move with, I think, grace and ease is a term that's out there, that we're looking to find the central point around gravity where we can move to and from and balance ourselves around. We're looking at efficiencies, bringing some resilience to the system, re-education, some more awareness of the body, where they are in space, how they move in space. Flowing on from that, the goal of improved balance and coordination, and to be pain-free without just chasing the pain. We share similar assessment protocols, though, looking at our history of the client, taking in all the trauma, the physical, the surgeries, everything that's happened to that person, because we know that it can be something that happened early on in their life that contributes to how they present to us. So that was a slight difference that they could see. We do the visual assessment. We're looking at symmetries and alignment, looking at the 3 planes of movement. So there were some crossovers, but again, we're looking at this whole body. We're looking at movement, gait, and of course, we're using our hands, so throughout we're palpating. There's other elements, depending on your background, that you may bring into your assessment as well. But we were trying to keep it within the context of somebody that completes their training, perhaps what they are going to be looking at. So that was sort of the overview of structural integration. I hope we've done it, justice, but a lot of them were quite surprised, amazed, and intrigued by how we work. So I think for structural integration to be on the stage with all these other therapies is amazing. And I think this will be a huge benefit to us in the industry. So to paint a picture of structural integration, we came up with 6 key elements that you see here in colour. One is contact. We contact using our hands, elbows, forearms, fingers, knuckles, thumbs, whatever part is most appropriate. We use minimal lubrication or none at all, or some of us use water. We work multi-directional, context-based in terms of whether we want to lift or drop, to ground, to spread. And we'll look at those in a little bit more detail shortly. We actively engage our clients and we use different positions. We adapt our touch continually in terms of responding to what's happening under our touch, their feedback, and again, context, what are we trying to achieve with those tissues? We work different layers. We work core and we work superficial or the sleeve. We target the different layers depending on what is presented and what session perhaps we're looking at or delivering. And we approach specific territories, again, context-based, depending on our client, what session we're in, and we'll look at those a little more. So let's just pause for a moment and just come back to what David said is, why is it important to describe what we do with our hands? And the baseline is so that it can be replicated. One case study alone, it doesn't hold much weight. But if we could describe what we do so that the scientists can understand, then we can replicate and have more case studies, have more evidence about how structural integration works, how it is beneficial, and how the approach is different and perhaps more sustainable for clients. And I think I've just mentioned why replication is important. It's not enough to just, I guess, what comes to mind for me now are terms like when I first joined the team, Eric mentioned things like worrying. And we've had to clarify that, what is worrying? So terms like that have had to be adapted to actually what are we doing with our hands? So if we first look at our contact, and we've sort of expanded the list thanks to everybody that attended last time. So if you just have a look at this list of glide, scoop, we hook, we spread, we share, twist, hold, rotate, wave, we compress. Just take a moment and think about, are there any other ways we make contact or how you make contact? And pop them in the chat. And I think, keep in mind that whilst this contact happens and we've isolated our contact right now, all of the others are at play as we work. So there's not, contact doesn't happen in isolation. We've got the client actively engaged at the same time. But we've had to sort of find words that describe what we're doing. Hopefully some of you are putting some things in the chat. So if we look at direction, you think about how you work the tissues with your clients. We can spread from a midline. We can work parallel or across fibers. At angles, we can compress into tissues and we can also lift them. Directionally, we can also work to or away from restrictions. So again, just take a moment and think about any other directions that may not be included in our list. It's great. I can see lots of, I can only see the bubble with the chat numbers going up, and within a moment we've gone from 7 to 16. That's great. Keep them coming. So if we move on to specific territories, and I guess we work many, many areas in the body. in the last webinar, somebody said that they work, more specifically in the ear and around the ear. So we've sort of summarized, knowing that, there's bony attachments and margins everywhere in the body, the intermuscular septa, broader fascial planes, like perhaps the lumbar dorsal fascia, the edges of myofascial structures. So working that sort of in between one structure and another. And specific territories, depth can also feature there, be it superficial or deep or progressively through. So again, take a moment and write any specific territories, because from your specific territories, we can then adapt them to, well, yes, that's a bony attachment. That's what we consider that to be. But often we need that detail to then be assured that we're getting all of the territories. It's great that people are arriving still. So the recording will be available after this, anyone that's joined in the last few moments. So you'll be able to have a little bit of a recap. Active client engagement is perhaps one area that may make some difference to our work, in that we have either the whole person moving or asking them to do specific things, where we get this extrinsic or intrinsic activation happening. We have specific pelvic work that we do at the end of our sessions. And the engagement of the client to lift their awareness and their perception of what is happening. I transitioned from being a massage therapist to a structural integrator. And some of you may have experienced the same thing of, oh my goodness, I'm not going to have my client on the table for an hour. I'm going to get them up and down, and they're going to be seated. They're going to be working. And it was a huge transition for me, but the results were amazing, to give more ownership to the client through this process of engagement. So you may like to pop in some notes as to how you engage your clients. And I think if we then just come back to these 6 elements, not one of them stands alone. And even though for research purposes, sometimes we have to be reductionist, we obviously have conveyed this message that structural integration is delivered in such a way that is more holistic, the whole person in gravity rather than lying on a table, actively involved, for the benefit of the client, because at the end of the day, that's who we're serving. So keep those thoughts coming through the next presentation, because I'm going to be handing over to Eric in a moment, because we really want to make sure that we have this and all the information from you, because that's really important. We're a small team that have been growing, but your input as the people out there working is really important. So thank you for listening. Thank you for those that have put their comments in the chat. So I'm going to head over there now and look at it. I'm going to stop sharing and hand over to Eric.
Thanks for that, Bernie. That was terrific. Bernie's done a great job of organizing 2 years of deliberations into something that is easy to understand. Let's see, I'll share my PowerPoint screen here. Okay, is that showing up?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So Bernie did topic 1. As David explained, the conference is organized around 3 topics. And each of the 5 professions have spent 2 years trying to describe their profession in terms of these 3 topics. It's not easy. So topic 1 was what we do with our hands, which Bernie presented so brilliantly. Topic 2, which on David's slides, it was called, what was it called? Theories? Be more specific, because one thing we're trying to do is to develop a language that for research that people across the professions can use so they understand each other. One of the big reasons for this conference was Paul Stanley wrote a very interesting article. We pointed out that if you look at the research of these 5 professions, they don't reference each other. Why? Because they're using different languages. So we're trying to develop similar languages for the purpose of research. So hypothesized therapeutic mechanisms, that's topic 2. It's kind of a mouthful, but I'm going to break down what that is, what those words mean. Hypotheses, we're going to talk about what that means. What are therapeutic mechanisms? What are mechanistic cascades? And finally, what are the hypothesized therapeutic mechanisms of structural integration? That's a lot of syllables. And I'll also talk about why this is important for us as a structural integration community and as a proto-profession. What is a hypothesis? It's a theory, but there hasn't been any evidence to say that it's true or not true. It's just hanging out there. And the evidence in science has to be quantitative. It has to be numbers. Bernie made that point. Case studies are valuable, but a case study doesn't prove anything. A study of 9 or 10 people doesn't prove anything. You've got to get enough people so your numbers are more convincing. Most scientific research programs or projects have a specific question and a specific hypothesis. For instance, when we lean on somebody's lumbar spine, why do they say their back feels better? So we have a hypothesis about what's happening. And it's important for us because if you don't have a hypothesis, you're not going to get any money to do a study. They're not going to give you money just to say, oh, we want to muck around and explore this or that. No, you have to have a specific question and a specific hypothesis. Same thing if you want to get your study ever published. So what is a therapeutic mechanism? Okay, somebody comes to us with a symptom, even if it's just, oh, I feel blah, I feel yucky, or maybe I feel normal, I want to feel super normal, but they have something they want to change. We do an intervention. Structural integration, it's with our hands. It's mostly working on fascia. Then we have an outcome. Now, the point I want to make is the intervention is not the therapeutic mechanism. That's not what the word means. What the word means is what happens in between the intervention and the outcome. Now, clearly, that is an important question. It's very important scientifically, because if you cannot cite evidence for some mechanism, most other professions won't believe what you're saying. Think about it a minute. The world is filled with hundreds, probably thousands of different kinds of therapies, and they all claim to produce such and such an outcome. But they don't get any traction because there's no explanation for how that could possibly work. And we believe it because we see it every day, but other professions look at our intervention and our outcomes, and some of them say, well, that's interesting, but a lot of them say, that's impossible. There's no mechanism. So that's why therapeutic mechanisms are important. Now, in the conference, we decided to limit ourselves to 3 kinds of mechanisms: biomechanical, neurological, and biological. We're explicitly leaving out psychological. We know the psychological stuff is important, but just to handle those 3, teams have been working for 2 years. And we're going to address the psychological mechanisms and possibly other mechanisms in a following conference. But for this conference, We're acknowledging all the psychological stuff is important. We just can't deal with it the first time around. We're just dealing with these three. So I'll give you some examples of what we mean. What is a biomechanical mechanism? Suppose somebody has shoulder pain and dysfunction. You know, the classic sign they can't raise their arm more than 90 degrees. Rotator cuff is what it's usually called. That's the symptom. The intervention. I'm not saying this is the only intervention, it's just an example. But very typical PT people will give you shoulder rotation exercises with one of those elastic bands for resistance. And they work pretty well. I've had some progress. I have friends whose rotator cuff have been tremendously improved just by doing those exercises. What's the mechanism? Some of you know what the supra and infraspinatus are. They're the little muscles that run above and below the spine of your scapula, and they insert deep into the upper end of the humerus. And those muscles hold the ball of the humerus in the socket. And their getting weak is generally recognized as the reason that people get rotator cuff dysfunction, because they fail to hold the ball in the socket. So the mechanism that's pretty well documented now is if you do those exercises, those muscles get stronger, they get better blood supply, they hold the ball in the socket, and people get reduced pain and they get bigger range. So that's a biomechanical mechanism. Neurological mechanism. Chronic cervical pain. The classic beginning of chiropractic. Intervention, high velocity, low amplitude adjustment to the vertebra. I'm not saying it's the only one, it's just an example. The mechanism, reduce pressure on the nerve. This is pretty well documented. I'm not saying there's not a placebo effect to any of these, but you can do x-rays and CAT scans. You can show that the nerves are compressed, and then you can show they're less compressed after the treatment. So the outcome is reduced pain. That's an example of a neurological mechanism. What's changing is a nerve. Something's changing in how the nerve works or how the nerve is impaired. Oops, I'm ahead of myself. Biological mechanism. Symptom, osteoarthritic knee pain. Not rheumatoid. Rheumatoid is different. Osteoarthritic is just mechanical abrasion of the cartilage. Intervention. One intervention, which I have been doing for 10 years, is you take some glucosamine sulfate every day. It works. There's even large clinical trials that show it reduces people's pain and inflammation in their knees. What's the mechanism? Glucosamine sulfate is a molecule that's already in your joints that your body has been using since you were born to repair cartilage. It declines as we age. If you start to get pain and dysfunction from abrasions of your cartilage because you're 74 like me, if you throw some glucosamine sulfate in there, it ups the repair of cartilage and the pain's reduced. So that's an example of a biological mechanism. Why is it important to think about, work with, try to research therapeutic mechanisms? If you know something, have some research about a therapeutic mechanism, it can inform what your research plans are. Which hypotheses are higher priority? Either because they'd be game changers in the field or because there's already some evidence, but not enough evidence, and you want more evidence. Is there any way to measure your hypothesis? As I pointed out before, if you just have the intervention and the outcome, yes, you can measure that. It's called a clinical trial, but it doesn't tell you anything about the mechanism. To confirm the mechanism, you've got to measure something other than the intervention and the outcome, whether it's biomechanical, neurological, biological, you've got to have a way to measure it. Otherwise, you can't do the research. And any research plan, you want to review the literature so that there's some literature on the mechanism that influences your choice. What is the benefit if we could confirm some of the therapeutic mechanisms of structural integration? Get a lot more money because people are reluctant to spend money on a therapy where there's no mechanism. They'll say, why should we spend money on this? There's no plausible way it could work. You'll get a lot more acceptance in biomedical clinics and hospitals David's situation is extremely rare. There have been just a tiny handful of biomedical institutions that have Rolfers on their staff. It's great, but I always make this contrast. Why is acupuncture everywhere in the biomedical world? It's in hospitals, it's in clinics, it's in private practices. Because there is a confirmed therapeutic mechanism. Bruce Pomerantz, I think it was like 20 years ago, published a neurological mechanism. Then it got tons of funding. And now because it's credible, because it's a credible mechanism, hospitals say, oh, it works, we'll include it. MDs say, oh, it works, I want to get trained in it. We could be in the same position if we had some research on mechanisms. Finally, the public has more credibility, sort of massively more credibility. Okay, two other concepts before I go to the hypotheses for structural integration. It's important to understand that there can be different levels of how we understand the mechanism. There can be biomechanical, histological, immunological, neurological, biomechanical, molecular, genetic. The last three are all biological. So the story about the rotator cuff problem and the muscles that get stronger, okay, that's a mechanism on one level, but you could ask a histological question. If we look very microscopically at the tissue, how does the tissue change? How are those muscles changing? If we look at the reduction in inflammation, we could say, well, how is the immune activity changing in that joint so there's less inflammation? Is it affecting the nerve messages? Then we could look even deeper. We could say, how are the molecules changing in those muscles? We could look epigenetically. Is it the fact that these muscles are working better, does that have something to do with which genes are turned on and turned off? So you can go deeper and deeper and deeper levels. What is a mechanistic cascade? This is an important idea. It isn't always just one mechanism between the therapy and the outcome. You can have one mechanism that triggers another one, and you can even have more than two in a cascade. So you have symptom, intervention, you can have one mechanism, then another mechanism before you get the outcome. It gets complicated, but it's scientifically important because sometimes you've got to elucidate more than one mechanism to make it plausible that you're getting the outcome you're getting. I realize I'm throwing a lot at you here. If you have questions or comments, please put them in the chats. We always want to try to make this stuff clearer. Every time we go through it, we try to make it simpler and clearer. So now I want to talk about some hypotheses about how come structural integration works. And I got these out of the literature pretty much. There's one or two that we thought up on our own in the team, but you'll see a lot of them come already from Dr. Rolfe in her books and her lectures. We have a manual intervention. That's how it starts. There's the immediate mechanisms. One of them, most of you know that fascia is colloidal. The ground substance in fascia is a colloid. That's like butter. It's a substance that if you put more energy into it, it flows more. So we're leaning on fascia. Right away, it's starting to flow more. We can feel that under our hand. But we also see a long-term increase in elasticity, and we see reductions in fibrosis. We don't know how that happens. How does that short-term change produce the long-term change? I haven't seen any even detailed hypotheses about how that happens, and it's important. We have to discover that. That, if you're good strategically and you apply your hands in a skillful way, you can improve the elasticity of specific joints. You can improve the balance, anterior, posterior, left to right. You can improve the range of motion. You can improve the bony alignment. All these things we do every day with Rolfe, structural integration. What happens if you improve the alignment? You reduce nerve impingement, you reduce cartilage damage, you reduce inflammation. Then you get an outcome. You reduce pain and disability. You see in the lower left-hand corner, I'm color coding these. Biomechanical mechanisms are in blue, outcomes are in orange. Okay, now it gets a little trickier. Also, the long-term increase in elasticity, as we all know, the elasticity then spreads, especially after 4 or 5 sessions. People come in and they look better overall. And they say, oh, I'm feeling changes, here and there during the week. Why is that important? we get an increased approximation of the postural and movement ideals that Bernie talked about at the very beginning. Alignment, symmetry, anterior, posterior, horizontality, grace in movement, all the ideals that Dr. Rolfe put out there, and now some people have added some more. We have to acknowledge that. But that is a mechanism. Why does anybody want to approximate those ideals? Maybe they want to just because they look better, but looking better, that's cosmetic. Most people want reduced pain and disability. There's also a reduction in muscular tension. If all the fascia gets more elastic, people don't have to struggle as much within themselves. We see this every day, but that's a mechanism. There's also an improvement in energy efficiency. Dr. Rolfe talked about that all the time, that if a body is more elastic, more aligned, more symmetric, it doesn't take so much energy to deal with gravity. It doesn't take much energy to move around and do things. Now, in the left hand here, we have a neurological mechanism. This is the work of Robert Schleek, who's published a lot about this and who got prizes for his doctoral dissertation on this. When we're leaning on tissue, we're not just affecting the ground substance of the fascia. We're also affecting a whole host of different kinds of nerves that are in the fascia. And a lot of these nerves are mechanoreceptors. They fire when they get mechanical input, like pressure or shearing. And one of Robert's hypotheses, which is not entirely new to Robert, there's a very old piece of research by John Cottingham that was on the same point, is that one of the effects would be an increase in parasympathetic to sympathetic activation. Parasympathetic, remember, is when you're relaxed. Sympathetic is when you're alarmed or upset. And the modern term for this is heart rate variability. Robert also hypothesizes that there can be an effect on myofascial tone to the whole body. And there is a lot of research in the wider research world about the benefits of improved heart rate variability. If there's more parasympathetic relative to sympathetic in the control of the heartbeat, lots of dimensions of health get better. So that's a neurological hypothesis, a hypothesized neurological mechanism. Here's another one. Dr. Rolfe talked about this a lot. The Golgi receptors, some of you know, are little nerves that report back to the brain on whether the muscle is, what the state of stretch is, whether it's relaxed or stretched and how stretched it is. Now they're located in the origins and tendinous insertions of muscles. They're not in the body of the muscle. And Dr. Rolfe pointed out that the origins and insertions, we all know this from feeling people's bodies, that's where the fascia gets really hard. And if it's hard enough and has no elasticity, then there's no stimulation to those nerve endings. The brain doesn't know what's happening in terms of that muscle. So Dr. Rolfe pointed out, if we get more elasticity in the origins and insertions of muscles, the Golgi structures fire and we get improved coordination because the cerebellum, the movement part of your brain, knows more about what's happening. I think we've all experienced that. Classically, the more often you get, the more you can feel what's happening in your body. There's just one other mechanism I want to talk about. Dr. Rolfe talked about this too. If there's a lot of fibrosis and density, her point was that there's not that much fluid moving through the fascia. The fascia, some of you understand, is like a swamp. There's a lot of water moving through it. And Dr. Rolfe thought it was important for health that this water moved through. This was not her idea. It was in A.T. Still, 1899, I think it is, Philosophy of Osteopathy. The primary principle of osteopathy was to improve fluid migration through the body. Dr. Rolfe thought this was a good idea too. And more recently, much more recently, we have science that chronically painful parts of the musculoskeletal structure, if you can suck some of that fluid out, there's a technique now called microanalysis. You suck out a tiny little bit of fluid, you analyze it, you find a lot of immune cells and molecules that are amplifying inflammation and pain in those chronic pain places. And that's not in the blood, it's not in the tissue, it's in the fluid. It's in the interstitial fluid. So if we get that interstitial fluid flowing more, then we can expect that it clears out those pro-inflammatory and pain-increasing markers in the tissue. So that's a hypothesis. It's an important hypothesis. We don't have any proof about it. It's just a theory. I'm going to leave this up here just for a minute for you to stare at. If you have questions, if you have other theories, there might be some even in the literature that I missed. Put them in the chat, please. So there's more than one kind of mechanistic hypothesis for Rolfing. There have been since the writings of Ida Rolf, and Robert has added some more, Robert Schleep. And this is not all of them. I simplified this diagram. There's about 5 more, but I tried to make it simplified so it'd be a little bit easier to absorb. And this is what we're going to present in the conference for topic 2 about structural integration. And one thing we're interested in the conference is how many of our hypotheses are the same as the hypotheses of other professions. I already mentioned that some of these are common with osteopathy since its founding. Some of them are obviously overlap with chiropractic, the idea of nerve impingement. So we talked about the goal of the conference, develop a common language. We talked about what are hypotheses, what are therapeutic mechanisms, the 3 kinds we're dealing with in the conference. We talked about there could be different levels of mechanisms. We talked about mechanistic cascades, how one can trigger another. And we went through some of the hypothesized mechanisms of structural integration. So I look forward to reading your chats about this. Thanks for your attention.
It is so rare that I'm ever muted, but thanks, guys. Anyway, thank you, Eric. Thank you, Bernie. And thank you, everyone who's continued to come into the room while we've been going on. I want to reiterate that the video of this will be posted in its entirety on the ICMT conference site for you to watch, for those of you who came in while it was in progress. I know we have a few people from outside the US who were like, forgot about that whole time zone thing. Oops. But that does happen, so don't worry, you'll be able to catch up. So we've just heard a lot of stuff, and I've been seeing a lot of great action happening in the chat box. Really looking forward to digging in and unpacking that with you and with Liz in a few moments. I talked earlier about the ICMT vision. Now I want to explain a little more of the nuts and bolts about this conference, because there's some really unique things about it. You'll notice at the bottom, underlined in red, May 4th through June the 3rd. That is the dates for the conference itself. Initially, it was going to be an in-person conference, but back in December, we kind of had to make a decision, and one of the universities helping to sponsor this conference was kind of leaning on us to make that decision. So the decision was made early on to make it virtual, but it's not going to be death by Zoom. We have something really cool I'm going to show you about in a minute. But before that, I want to thank our sponsors. As you can see, we've had some major sponsors here, including the Dr. Ida Rolf Institute, the Rolf Research Foundation, and also I want to thank our platinum sponsor, Anatomy Trains, who did a lot to get the word out, along with the Rolf Research Foundation and IASI, the International Association of Structural Integrators, to make this forum possible today. And as you may have heard, we've got over 120 people who signed up to be here today. And I've been doing this 20 years, and I never thought I would see such a thing. So I want to thank each and every one of you, but not individually, because that will eat up the rest of our time. So we're creating a number of things in the process of developing this conference. I've talked about how we've been working on this for between 2 and 3 years, depending on who in the working groups came in when. And one of the tools we're developing, along with more traditional papers, is this visual orientation device called a mind map. Now, here is the mind map that Václav and Eric have been working on, structural integration. And you can kind of see the through line there between different types of ways we use our hands and different outcomes and potential mechanisms. And this is going to be even made more robust with hot links in them, going to videos, going to specific research papers, so on and so forth. This mind map is part of a much larger mind map that is also integrating the other professions. And this is just one of the tools we've been working on so that we can begin to understand each other better. And that's going to be part of the conference. And so is our conference space. I don't know about you, but I miss being together and interacting with people. Things are finally opening up a lot here in Pittsburgh, and it's been fantastic, but it's not that we're everywhere. And certainly we have a lot of people coming to this thing from Europe. So our creative staff, predominantly, I hesitate to call him our IT guy because that diminishes his incredible importance to this project, but Jeffrey Franklin found this particular platform called GatherTown. So GatherTown allows you to create an icon and beam into a virtual conference hall. That's where I am right now. But see, during the conference, it's going to be full of people. You can see me down in the lower right corner with my camera. Oh, look, here's a room. I'm going to go into this room just like I would a room in person. I can click on the X and become a member. I don't want to do that. Oh, I can sign up for swag. I'm going to hit the X, and that is actually going to take me to a form, and I can sign up for whatever DO TouchNet wants. And that's going to be the same with all the vendors and all the vendor booths. And this space is going to be open 24 hours a day for the entire month of the conference. You see, we've got markers on the floor, conference rooms, breakout rooms. Everything's going to be scheduled like a real conference. You'll get your steps in like you do at a real conference. We've got a recreation area. You can hang out. You can talk to other people. You can make new friends just like you do at a real conference. We're also going to have some videos here of some stretch routines and some guided meditation to kind of chill out and enjoy. And we've also got a real lecture space with the microphone so you can go and ask questions to the presenters just like you would at a real conference. Now we're going to go to the poster hall and the social rooms. So we're going to have poster presentations. Cool thing about this one is you'll actually be able to go up to the posters and view a preview of them before the conference to see if that's a poster you might want to interact with the author of that particular poster on. So as you see, by the time of the conference, these temporary posters will be replaced by the real deal thing. Now we're going to go, because there's recreation. So if you want to get together with your friends, if you want to get together with a chiropractor and beat him or her at poker, you can do that here. Or maybe actually, if we're going to go up against chiropractors, maybe we could play Jenga. I believe there's a Jenga room. There's a number of different interactive and fun video games that we can actually play with each other during the conference. We're going to have breakout sessions throughout the week. As you can see here, there's a learning library and a cinema. There's going to be movies available to watch of different techniques from different practitioners. And you're going to be able to go in and visit these spaces anytime during the conference, like I am here, and watch that movie. Now, in this case, when I hit the X, like it tells me to, that's going to take me to the movie of the ICMT conference, the introductory webinar we did back in October. So this is going to be a very exciting, very robust, very fun space to be in. Want to spend a couple of minutes on our keynote speakers before we turn it over to Liz in the conversation. This is Lars Arnett Nielsen from Denmark, who is the Director for Sensory Motor Interaction. And isn't that what we do when we put it where it belongs and call for movement? It's sensory motor interaction. And he's going to be talking about why getting out of our silos is important, not just for reasons of science, but also for reasons of taking better care of the people we serve. The other person I'm really excited about, I've had the privilege of working with her a couple of times, is the current head of the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health in the United States, Helen Langevin. She has done more for research in the area of fascia, acupuncture, myofascial pain syndrome, and I'm just incredibly excited to have her involved in this project. You know, she is spearheading the HEAL initiative, which is an acronym for Help End Addiction Long Term. And one of the things that they are willing to throw pots of money at is people like us who can get people off of opioids and other painkillers and help restore some sense of health and well-being to them. But we also have to kind of do the homework that Eric was talking about, finding ways to who hold the purse strings on those things. I think that's pretty exciting. Now, registration is open. The virtual attendance is $399 for the entire month. And we have a special educational institutional rate. And I really want to billboard this for you out there who are maybe teachers and instructors. This is important. And for those of you who might know them, because if you've got a class, you can attend 10 people for $995. So you get one icon, that would be the teacher that can roam around the rooms, and 10 of you can piggyback on to this virtual experience and interact in real time with all these different professionals. Now, the key dates are as listed. We're going to have a social hour. You'll notice that all the times are Eastern Standard Time. We're trying to be as accommodating to other time zones as possible. So it's kind of odd to have a welcome reception social hour at 12 noon Eastern, but you got to remember, people coming from Europe, that's already getting into their evening at that point. So we're trying to structure the times of this around what would work better for most people. But remember, everything that we do, if you're signed up, is going to be available for viewing throughout the entire conference. Now, having said that, let's move on to the discussion phase, and I'm going to turn things over to our facilitator par excellence, Liz Stewart.
Hey there, everybody. So to me, this is the fun part where you guys get to participate. And I just want to set the frame so that you have an idea of what the plan is. And I just want to say hi. There are many of you that I know, and it's nice to see you here. And it seems as though we have a true international crowd. So those of you joining from Europe and Australia, and even as far as Hawaii, I'm really happy to see you, and those of you here on the mainland. So if I missed anyone, my apologies. So we're going to be here for just under an hour, and we have we've got a task that I think can be challenging, because just from reading the chats, this is a group that feels to me as though you're really interested in growing our profession. But when we have to stay connected to our task at hand, it makes it gives the window that we're working within a different focus, because so many of the comments, for example, is why aren't we talking about emotions? Where for me personally, that's the body-mind connection is very important. But as a teacher, and for those that teach, and for those of you that do series work, it's the same thing. We start with something that is at the beginning. And this conference is a beginning conference. So over time, my hope also is that we broaden this out for other topics or things that really enhance and are primary for so many of us in the work. And I hope that is satisfying enough for you guys to hear that. Our task at hand is really to talk about what is it that we do with our hands. Now, my take personally is I mentor a lot of students that are relatively new in structural integration. And the thing that I have come across over and over is, how do I talk to my community? How do I approach a chiropractor? How do I approach a physician? How do I approach somebody in my community so that I can be part of a community, not just out there alone with the shingle on my door and trying to figure this all out without support and a team approach. And when these young practitioners come to me, I would have to say that's in their top 5 concerns of how can I get my name out and articulate what it is that we do. So we've got that ability. And if you're new, if you're a practitioner here that is within your first 5 years, I'm really glad you're here. And I hope that you will be willing to say something. Now, as far as what we're going to talk about, there's a couple of ways to speak. One is that you can put your chat in, what you want to say in the chat box, and my teammates are going to help me moderate that. As far as hopefully someone will flag if there's something that we should put up there, because I can't read and be with you at the same time. I'm not that talented. The other way is to raise your hand. And so if you look at the bottom of your screen, there hopefully is somewhere in there that says reactions. And then there you can raise your hand like David is doing right now. David, did you want to say anything, or was that a model?
Yeah, I did. Well, actually, yes, timing is everything. So that's how you raise and lower your hands. But I did want to emphasize something that's come up a couple of times here, and you also re-mentioned, Liz, is that we have to start somewhere. So we're starting this initial foray into the ICMT project at the baseline of manual therapy. Now we are planning to have a follow-up conference after this one, and that's going to get into more aspects of the nervous system, the biopsychosocial models. It's going to get into more of that juicy, emotional, nervous system kind of stuff, but that's not where we're starting from today. So those of you who are asking, but what about, we will be addressing that, because we're not just doing this as a one-time thing. We're trying to build, inform, and grow an organization and a series of continued meetings and conferences that hopefully will outlast all of us.
Yeah, thanks, David. So why don't we get started? And the way I would like to invite everybody to turn their cameras on. Even if you're a little nervous about showing your face, if you're open to coming in for a minute, just so you can see your peers here, that we are a group of people that made a decision on a Sunday, regardless of the time, to be here and to be together. And we're from a variety of schools. And to me, that is exciting that we're here. So thank you guys for showing up from near and far. So our task is, what are we doing with our hands? There's a lot of other things we would like to talk about, but can we do our best to stick to the topic? And my personal interest, I will share because I was here last time, was what are we doing with our hands when we are at those integrative sessions? I have taught those integrative sessions. I've taught continuing ed for them. They tend to be really tricky to talk about. And this is not a conversation where you have to hold back. You will probably not be alone. So if you even come on and say, well, I do have trouble, but here's one thing I know that I do, just know that you might be helping out another person simply by raising your hand. So is there anybody who would take a risk and raise their hand and talk about what they do with their hands? You can chat it, or you can go to reactions. And I have the, I'm just going to go with who shows up on my screen because it puts it in a line of who raises their hand first. So anyone want to begin by talking about, within the series or in these integrative sessions, what are we doing here?
Liz, if I could actually just jump in. I've had a really good look at the chat. So thank you to everybody that has contributed. I've got a really nice long list. And what's really nice is they're different to our last webinar. So that's going to give us a lot more to think about going forward. There are a couple that were mentioned by several people, and it sort of flowed on a conversation in the chat, which was really nice. And Lisa, you were, I think, the first person to mention listen, and we listen with our hands. And so I guess that is part of palpation. Andrea, I think you said something about hold. And then David jumped in and said tactile listening. So that is something that we do with our hands. So we'll take that on board and see if we can interweave it. But thank you for that. There were some directional ones like spreading towards the midline. That wasn't on our list. So thank you for all of those. We're going to print out the chat so we don't miss anybody's comments. But yes, I'm going to be quiet now and head back to Liz and anyone else who'd like to speak.
Great, thank you, Bernie. I just want to mention that Bibiana and I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Yanko, have also written in here. And please go to the chat because you both are speaking to things that are very important. And the question is how do we explain that to another person? And Yanko, the thing about language, what we are describing is a language. So words can be tricky for us because we are actually experts here. So let's see if we can find some words to go with what we're speaking to. So Jesse, it's nice to see you. Let's unmute. I don't know if you unmute yourself or there you go. You're on, Jesse.
Hi, Liz. How's
Hi,
it going?
Jesse.
Great to see you. Well, you know, I'm excited that you asked that question because I think, first of all, it's crucial that we define what integration is, like what that means. And that's really been on my mind for the last several years. I don't really know how the other schools teach this, but I know for us, the integration segment of the series, we actually have some really like very basic things that we do where we change the style of touch. We use a much broader touch. And we are essentially trying to like contact different segments. So I'm using a broad palm kind of contact with different intent, different kind of sync. I'm tracing, and we also use elements of dialogue that connect with our touch and how we're actually connecting the pattern, because the integration is often about how do we address that whole pattern, right? So that becomes a very different way in which we're actually doing our integration sessions versus kind of the initial, you know, if you wanted to kind of pare it down, the release work, where, you know, all of the work, every touch you have is integrative to the body, but we actually change the form. So I don't know if that's how the rest of you guys do that, but.
Well, I like what you said, Jesse, about how you made it very simple. And one of the things that we forget about is that when we speak to another person, simple can go very far.
Absolutely.
You know, when you think about how you interact with other people during your day, do we tend to go right to the most complex form of conversation, or that seems to take time? So just that idea that we keep it simple, we broaden our touch. I might add, we broaden our touch and ask for a movement and connect the places that we're touching might be another step to that. Is there anyone else that would like to add to what Jesse has said? And all you have to do is raise your hand. I promise I won't be the teacher and randomly call on anybody. Any brave souls just want to take a risk and say hi and begin? There, David Lesondak.
Actually, I want to address something Jesse said earlier, and that was in the chat box, because I want to be sure that that has its due. I know I talked about the what we're planning for in the future of the ICMT, but Jesse actually said, if we're not including the phenomenon of shared presence within the how of why touch works, I'm not sure I can get on board with biomechanical research. And you're not wrong, but that's adding an additional level of complexity. And sometimes we have to step back away and define the basics before we can get to those levels of complexity. And I wanted to tell you very briefly about a study that was done in exactly what you're talking about. I want to say 2018, but they did a fMRI, and they were, which is a functional MRI, and they were looking at the brain of the person being touched. And what they found was that when the operator, that is the person doing the touching, and these were not skilled people like us trying to follow a tactile listening or induce a change. These were just people touching other people. When they had to focus on the quality of the touch, the heat, the texture, the pliability, any of the other kind of extero, intero, proprioceptive things that you get in your fingers from touching other people. One team was focused on that. The other team of touchers had to focus on a series of audio beats that were coming in via headphones, and that's where they were supposed to put their intention. It changed the brains of the people on the MRI, or I shouldn't say it changed them, but the focus on the quality of touch lit up different parts of the brain than the people who were checked out and thinking about something else, you know. So if your PT is on their iPhone, get a new PT. That's what I'm saying. Now, what was really cool about the people who had to focus on their touch was that it actually lit up the areas of the brain that are thought to be more involved with interoception. How cool is that? So these kinds of things are being looked at, but they're incredibly exciting to me, but they're still in the minority. And we're trying to bring these kinds of studies and these kinds of ideas more into the majority. And I wanted to be sure you felt heard about that, Jesse. Thanks.
Thanks, David. I want to point out one comment in the chat, and I will put you a little bit on the spot, Jeffrey Birch, but we have that relationship, so I'm going to take the risk, is that you wrote in here, one of the things that continues to amaze you is how many different ways of touching all produce the changes that we seek. So if each of you would just take a moment and think about what's one way that you tend to touch, and see if anything comes to mind in a way that you could describe it. It could be touching the superficial layer. How do you do that? What's different about going to a deeper layer? What's different about working with an integrative touch? And while you're thinking, Eric, you've got your hand up, so I'm gonna see what's on your mind.
Thanks, Liz. I just wanted to respond to the same point David was responding to. We're not, quote unquote, neglecting emotions or presence or anything like that. It's just that it's taken us 2 years to deal with the biomechanical, the neurological, and we're not really dealing very well with the biological. There is a huge literature about social effects, energetic effects. I know this because I've worked with a group that studies placebo response for 10 years. We just could not possibly add all that stuff on top of what we're doing. So we put it off for a second conference. It's not that we're neglecting it. Point 2 is, of course, you can, if you're talking about structural integration, you can include everything. But if you're trying to do science, you can't, in one research project, do everything. You can't do all those biomechanical, neurological, immune system, plus the placebo response, plus the energy. You can't do it. You have to limit it much more. So we're starting limited, but it doesn't mean that we're ignoring the rest. We're going to do that next time.
Great, thank you, Eric. Before I come to you, Denise, thanks for coming. I just want to point out a comment that Marcel wrote in here about integration sessions, that it's an important dimension of the work through touching the fascial planes, about remapping the movement map of the brain and helping the body to relearn how structures can relate to each other and move more efficiently. And when I read that, Marcel, I had this image. And so I'm going to give you an example of how I would describe that with my hands, because ultimately we want to really focus on what we do here is if I am doing one of the integrative sessions, and in the 10 series, I might say the lower 8th session, I might have the client sitting and I'll place my hands on their femurs and ask them to hinge forward and back on their sit bones. And then I listen to my hands and what is happening underneath my hands. Often I'll feel the tissue going wide as they come forward. So I would want to keep my hands there and actually holding in a way so that the tissue will lengthen a way that doesn't take away from the center, that doesn't shorten the body. So this is one way to take this idea of working with our hands with this idea, this very nice idea that you wrote in there, Marcel. I highly doubt that's what you were thinking, but often when somebody writes something, it might trigger an idea for you that you could articulate here. So with that said, Denise, where would you like to go in the conversation? And you are muted.
Okay, I got
There you
it.
go.
Hey, good afternoon. So the thoughts of integration, like everybody can take the body apart, like all of these other professions can take the body apart. So I think integration is exactly what separates us, besides working holistically, from everyone else. So my question really is like, since we're like dropping off the emotional aspect of it, because it's kind of hard right now, it's too much to explain. How are we going to prove integration? And maybe this is a question for Eric and for David. It just seems like such a broader technique, such a complex technique, but it can't be missing for the definition of what structural integration is. Do you have any ideas on that? Because when I was working on this project at the very beginning, they wanted to drop integration completely with the first group. And I was just like, no, we can't. So
it's in the name. It's in the name. I agree with you. That was
yeah.
That was weird. That was
Yeah.
weird. Denise was there in the old days when we were
In
at
the old
school,
days.
slinging it out, doing cage matches and things.
Yeah, it kind of felt like it.
It did. There were times when it did. It got, the word I like to use is chewy. It got really chewy. In
This
the
is
early
making
days.
me happy. I will say this.
Oh, I'm so glad
approach
to
is
hear that. I'm
really
so glad.
making me
It's
happy.
making me happy too. So that's a really good question. And there are, for the sake of this discussion, I'm going to put out there that there are levels of integration. So when a patient, excuse me, but as you know, I work at a biomedical facility, but when they're coming in their 10th session, 11th session as a 12 series guy, and they're saying, oh, you know what, when I reached up to get X, when I went to do Y, I noticed I can do that now and I'm fine with it. That's to me when we know integration is happening. And that to me is a slow process of decoding their pattern, helping them understand their pattern, helping them learn how to live into a new pattern, and then seeing the results of how that changes their life on a day-to-day basis. Something as simple as rolling over in bed with ease. I can't tell you what a big difference that makes for a lot of people. And in most people, I do get some people who are like, I understand this is a really cool way to learn about my body and make it my best friend. I love those people. That's maybe 10% of who comes in to see me. They usually come in to see me because they have a very practical problem. So that's the level, that's a very clinical level that my practice is taking, which I realize is not necessarily everyone else is out there. But that's how I look into it. And, sometimes there is an emotional quality to that. I often hear that from their spouses or partners. But if you've got somebody who hurts all the time and now they hurt very little, it's going to have a profound effect on their relationships, on their emotions, and everything else. Just simply put, that is a big difference. So that's how I think about it. And if they keep coming back with the same problem, it's like, well, what's not integrating? Or do they need something in addition to this to get them over that hurdle? And that's where the collaboration starts.
So movement through myofascial planes through the body, movement through myofascial chains of the body, segments moving together, integration type language is what I would add. Right?
And how would you describe what your hands are doing while you're calling for a movement, Denise?
Listening, absolutely. Yeah. Listening to all the fascial layers, all the fascial planes moving in the direction throughout the body versus just in that one section. Moving through the joint.
Can I play devil's advocate with you for a moment?
Absolutely.
Denise? Okay. Yeah. So you're saying you're describing what you're talking about, and I am a brand new Soma practitioner, because I know you're from Soma, and I don't know what that means. So help me understand that one step more, that I could take it in and reproduce it.
So my hands are touching the tissue and feeling within the movement that all of the tissue is moving harmoniously throughout the body.
And what if I were to say, well, I don't know what moving harmoniously means and I can't feel those layers? Very Very real.
Yeah, very real. And then I would be like, okay, get back into your body and let's calm down. How to describe that?
That's the hard part.
It is the hard part, yeah.
Anybody else want to raise their hand? And Eric, I'm not avoiding you. I'm really trying to get some other folks to come in. So that's why I'm just going to go off a little bit here. So you are that student with Denise, and you can't feel something shifting, and you really want to feel it so you can tell someone else about the work. Anybody willing to not know and own that they don't know, but they're going to try to be in this conversation with Denise and me?
So Denise, so what you're saying with my hands, I'm holding. I'm being that student.
Okay,
So I'm putting my hand on and I'm holding.
okay. You're contacting, how about 2 different locations in the body so that we can feel for movement of the tissue through these 2 different locations.
That's great. That's simple. That's beautiful.
Okay.
So I'm going to pause there for a moment. And Evan, did you want to add something? And you're muted. There
Hi,
you
yes. I'm a fairly new rolfer. I'm just, it's been about a year. So, and I just wanted to, I was thinking about what the hands are doing in a way to approach integration. And I must say, I've only given a few integration sessions, but I would rather like to speak about a type of more like integration touch that I have felt when I'm working with people when they're standing, not on the table, and when I'm trying to help them to find how their weight can center and they can find their vertical. And what I've noticed is that when my hand starts to approach their skin on both sides, and I can sort of start to get tense, and I start to take their weight a little bit, and then I can feel the force through my feet. So my hand is becoming tense, and they're starting to lean into me. And so then I try to come off and soften my hand, and but still maintain the form, say, around their skull, but not take any weight. And in that way, I find that they have to find their own vertical, because they seem to come towards my hand and come out of their vertical, thinking that they're going to help me, or I don't actually know what they're trying to do when they do that. But so if I was thinking about what my hand is doing very physically, I would say it's sort of fluctuating towards like different states of tension and release, and maintaining a form, like a shape, or shaping around their tissue. And sometimes that might mean that I'm not trying to like keep it super straight, but allow it to be soft enough to be shaped by them, not tell their body they should shape to how my hand is. And I've noticed that feels different to me as opposed to if I'm on the table and trying to give some sort of directional compressive force. Then I have much more like tone in my hands, and I'm, attending to lots more things. Yeah, so that's just what I thought I would add.
Evan, so first of all, welcome to our profession. And I'm so glad that you were that person that took the risk and spoke. And I really like what you said, because what I hear is your hands are doing one thing, but actually your hands are an extension of all of you. And so you're working in relationship with your client, in space, in gravity, which we haven't talked much about. They are in gravity, which is what we all live in and what we don't necessarily feel unless we're having some kind of trouble or challenge in our body. And you're guiding an awareness through your hands, but also you're leaning in and coming out and feeling the weight through your own body. So your whole system is an extension of your hands, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Something like that.
Yeah. Well, it's all, there's also the mystery part of what is it that we actually are doing. So it's a challenging exercise. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, Eric, you're on.
Thank you, Liz. So following on what David said about there being levels of integration, yes, and following on the wonderful discussion Liz is facilitating about our clinical experience, if we want to make progress in the world of research and science that other professions will respect, we have to define these things in ways that they can be replicated and measured. I'm not saying we have to do that for clinical practice. I'm just saying there's a second step. After we've described clinical practice, if we want to go further into communicating with these other professions on a research science level, we've got to say now, how can we describe that very concretely in a way that a bunch of different researchers could replicate it reliably? And if we're going to say integration is important, how do we measure integration? There's probably levels, there's probably more than one way. There's probably biomechanical, there's probably a dozen ways to measure it biomechanically. Then you could measure it in terms of fluid movement, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm just underlining that the science step is another step beyond the clinical discussion.
Right. So is there anybody else that has their hand raised that I'm not seeing? Okay. I want to point out on the chat, there's a number of people talking about mystery and metaphor and art and poetry. And I'll be the first to admit I come from that type of education, that to me, there is so much unknown in our work. And yet, even when you go to a training where you might have a teacher that speaks in a metaphoric language, as I did, I trained with Peter Melchior, and he was the art of the, he understood the storytelling aspect of this work. And yet he still had to break it down into, when you take your hand, you might want to use your fingers and just this tip of the fingers here, this last part of the finger, and move the tissue this way in a certain area. So even though there can be the metaphor and the art and the mystery and truly magic to our work, we still have to be able to find a vocabulary for it. And I want to, I saw, Václav, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I did, to the other point. I was just start typing my stuff into the chat. I just hi everybody. I'm just blessed, you know, so many people being here and having such a great discussions here. I just wanted to connect on what David Ronsky say in the discussion, and what Eric was replying to about, and other folks about integration. I see two key points that needs to be addressed here. You know, as a group of structural integrators, if we want to move forward and put some evidence behind our work that we've all been doing so many years, and I'm probably the youngest here or one of the young ones here on this call. I see so many people doing this decades, so that's so great that you are all here. But I think the first piece is integration, and the other piece is, you know, integration in the gravity field. That's like two major things of Ida Pirov, right? So how we want to define outcomes of integration and structural integration, and how we want to define outcomes of integration in the gravity field, and how do we measure them. So I think if we can come up with ideas for studies that will just, you know, spit out multiple hypotheses that we can start proving or researching in the field with real clients and with control groups of clients. I think that'd be fabulous. I think that'd be great. So anybody who wants to speak up to that or send us the comments later, even by email. I'm sitting with Eric on IDA PROF research committee, so we try to facilitate any research regarding rolfing. I've been a member with Eric and Melanie. I see Melanie here, and Bernie, of course, on IDA PROF Research Foundation. So this is all groups that want to move this forward. So just a short comment from me on that.
Thank you for that.
Discussion.
Yeah, and I think also, you guys are here, we're all here together, but it's possible when we get off this call or in a day or two, or for those that are watching this that didn't get to be here, you might have an idea. And I am curious, I'm going to ask you, David Lesondak, if somebody has an idea that they want to send in and it didn't hit them today on the call, how would they send in something that could help the group?
Well, I am just going to voluntarily put my email address out here. That would be the most efficient, which is lesondakda@upmc.edu. It's there in the chat box now for everyone. And I would be very happy to take any of your questions, comments, concerns as they coalesce and bubble up to the surface.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Jeff, for posting something in there also. I am curious, as a very different sort of question. Oh, Katya, go ahead. I see your hand is raised, so I won't go to my different question yet.
Thanks, Liz, and hi, everyone. I just wanted to pick that one up and just talk about a study that I have been working on together with Robert Schleip, who is overseeing my PhD work. And I'm just wanting to point that out to or talk about this for people to get an idea what we've been discussing. So we're not done with that yet, but to make it a bit more operational maybe. So your ideas might spread from that or might grow from that, and maybe you contact David afterwards to, with your further ideas. So we have been setting up a study, and I'm very happy to see Marcel on here too, cooperating with the colleagues in Europe and Germany. And we want to measure the effects of a whole 10 series rolfing recipe. And we have been thinking about various variables that we can measure the integration of the whole series with. So we're thinking about not only measuring one thing, because as Eric and David already pointed out, there's probably not one thing that we can measure. It's various things and probably multiple studies, but we've been thinking about A, biomechanical properties of the fascia, then B, postural variables in the coronal and sagittal plane. And there are instruments or measurement devices that can do that very easily. So a number of different posture variables, and then also heart rate variability as a variable that talks or speaks to our nervous system. And then of course, also, as Eric has pointed out, pain. So how is the perceived pain of the person, as well as, and that's the last one that we have in mind in that context, functional stuff like David pointed out, range of motion, like how can someone move? How far can they move? So a mixture of things really. And I just wanted to throw these at you. So maybe you have other ideas that are really measurable at this point. Of course, we have the mystery in mind, but wanting to make it measurable and wanting to measure the whole 10 series effect, that's a couple of things that we have in mind or that we might do. So if you have any other ideas about that, hit us.
Yeah, I think it's important what you're speaking to, Katya. I will share with you guys that, we all started somewhere. So think back to where you started when you got into this work and where you have grown to now. Even if you are brand new, you still started somewhere. That's what got me into the work. And then slowly, and I've been in practice actually 30 years this week coming up, that now I've been exposed to YASI, I've been exposed to the Fascial Research Congress, I've been exposed to the Ida P. Rawl Foundation. These are things that would never have interested me years ago. I wasn't ready. However, I was thankful that research was going on, that people were writing papers long before any of those groups were organized, that people wanted to document. Even if I wasn't ready then, I have grown into wanting more information about the work. And I have where I land as my home base, but also this ability to reach further and constantly grow myself. So I am curious, anybody who hasn't spoken, and I'm kind of making a joke out of that, who would like to say anything here, even if you want to talk about why you don't want to speak up. I'm just curious because we do have just under 20 minutes. And often in these last few minutes, the best ideas show up. Jesse, your hand is raised.
Thank you. Just some thoughts about all of these that are maybe a little more practical. You know, when we're asking for integration, we are doing just that. We're asking. And what are we asking for in a series? What are we asking for? You know, we're inviting change. We're talking about art. We're talking about function. We are asking for awareness. So that's this key piece. We are inviting people. So for me, it's not just about, oh, now I can actually function and roll, like we can measure that there's a range of motion, but is somebody actually self-aware of that improved range of motion? And then can they volitionally connect with themselves to create? That's the integration part. Even if you take the mind out of it, there's an embodied awareness segment to that. Now, how do we measure that, right? Because awareness is totally subjective, right? Now, you might not be able, you know, we could maybe just ask the question, are you aware that your posture is different? Now that's subjective. That's 100% subjective. But what we might, you know, since we're seeking to invoke growth and change and awareness, maybe after a 6-month period, after we've also done, you know, we need to do these physical measurements and like kind of just pare down these things so that we actually begin to have a common language. After a series, let's say we do a study on a series and we ask somebody, are you aware of your postural changes? Some people may say yes, some people may say no. 6 months later, can we measure that posture? And is there a difference between the people who said, yes, I am aware, I'm cognitive of what actually has shifted in my system versus, I feel better range of motion, but I don't feel anything related to my posture. I'm not necessarily aware of that. That's measurable right there to be.
Yeah.
And so what are we doing when we're integrating? We're bridging the gap, right? We're bringing the connections together. And so I think that needs to be part of the conversation. And certainly that's measurable. Certainly our presence and our attention, all of those things are measurable. And we're adding layers of complexity if we can pare it down to, is there actually self-awareness there? I think that's where we're going to see that potentially, can we measure, does that change then? Is it sustained in the system?
Great. 2 words that you mentioned that I think were important, and I want to make sure we have time for a few other folks, if that's all right, Jesse, is you used evoke and you used bridge. And I think that those are 2 very key two key words that we can add to our vocabulary. I don't know if Lisa Gray is still here. Lisa, if you are and you want to pop in, you had your hand up next, and then you're not on my screen anymore. So I just want to give you one moment if you'd like to come back in. And if not, Andrea, I'm not sure how you pronounce your name, but why don't you unmute and you're up next.
Hello. You had mentioned about speaking up, so I'm working on that.
Excellent.
We're in Bismarck, North Dakota. And this is Ian. He is working in an apprenticeship style for advanced fascial work. I started massage therapy in 2007, got a hold of an anatomy trains book all on my own in 2010, and it changed my life and became my philosophy about understanding what was happening underneath my hands and working with people. And I am thrilled. I just wanted to, I guess, verbally express the gratitude to all of you who are doing this work and bringing us together and coming up with a language, because one of the hardest things had been, I have a personal, an athletic trainer who sends people to me, and she spoke to me and said one of the hardest things was, she would say, you should go get a massage from Andrea, and they would say, well, I already had a massage, and then she didn't have any words to say. She's just like, well, you should still go see Andrea, because what she's doing is different. There's no language. We don't have any language, you know. So I'm just grateful to hear the language, and I look forward to meeting and being involved. So
Great.
Thank you.
I'm glad you're here. Thanks for speaking up. I'm going to tell you guys a quick story, and then David, you're on after this. When I was, this was 26 years ago, and I was pregnant with my daughter, and I was at a party with Peter Melchior. And for those of you that don't know the name Peter Melchior, he was one of the first two teachers that Ida Rolf asked to teach structural integration. And he was my main teacher and mentor and friend. And so I was pregnant and I was at a party, his daughter's high school graduation, his youngest daughter. And we're sitting there, I'm very pregnant, I don't want to move much, it's hot out. And somebody comes up to us and sits down with us and says to Peter, so what do you do? And I thought, oh, this is going to be great. I'm finally going to hear someone who can describe what we do. And he began to talk and he said, well, so, and nothing came out of him. And then he switched it and he said, well, what do you do? And this man began to talk, and he very simply could talk about how he worked in building, he was a builder. And then Peter said, oh, well, if you're a builder, here's what I do for you. And I think that that's a really important story. It was for me, because I realized it's difficult even for my teacher to talk about this, but what wasn't difficult was to do it in relationship with another person. And ultimately, when we're speaking to that other professional, or like Andrea just mentioned, you know, somebody refers somebody to her, but can't really describe what it is that she does. That's a huge task that in 30 years I still struggle with, which is why I'm part of this. I want to get help. And so I come to these meetings, even though I have a role, I'm actually here to learn. And so I am curious. And David, I'm guessing you have something profound to say, I'm hoping, but I would like to find out if there's anything anybody heard here today that they can go home with that's new, that might spark an interest in them. And if there is that, please share.
Okay, well, thank you for that setup, Liz. It's either going to be profound or it's going to be profoundly silly. It's one coin, two sides with me.
Yeah.
I wanted to tell you, I think we're all enjoying this conversation tremendously. And I wanted to point out that is a feature of the ICMT conference is that we're going to be able to form and have more discussions like these throughout the month of the conference in real time by creating special interest groups that we can pre-schedule at selected days and times and use the virtual space of GatherTown to get together just like we're doing now and have some of these conversations and even do them interprofessionally. So I find that incredibly exciting. That's another unique feature of what we've constructed with the conference. I did want to say something about integration though, because I was remembering a patient of mine from many, many years ago, and it's what is integration? And then Christy O'Brien, Christy, thank you. She piped in and she said, she said, I see true integration as almost a forgetting of what was different because you are in the new now.
That's great.
The day you know that pain is gone is because you're not anymore. And that's exactly the point that I wanted to make. I had this one person I was treating, and they came back for like 6 months, 9 months later for some advanced work. And I asked when they were saying what was on their list of things to deal with, I said, how's your low back pain? And she said, I never came to see you for low back pain. And I was just like, oh, I'm sorry, I confused you with somebody else. And thinking I'm crazy or she's crazy. But I'm not going to get into that right now because it's going to spoil the session. So, but I was pretty sure I was right about this one. And so we got done with the session. And she's sitting in the chair and she's putting her clothes back on, and she bends forward to tie her shoes. And that was always the test at the end of every session. How did she feel? What did she feel when she bent forward to tie her shoe? And that became one of our markers for improvement. And she stopped, hadn't even started tying, looked up to me and said, I did used to come see you for low back pain. So maybe true integration is a perception beyond the you used to be, just like Christy so eloquently said.
So David, I'm going to stop
Just
you
a
because we
thought.
have two hands up that I want to make sure we have time for. So
I was done.
Arnaud, you're up, and then Alexander, you're next. So Arnaud, go ahead.
Yeah, what comes to my mind hearing you is first layers. It's really different layers, and we're all different. We are different stages, and so when we have new clients, we have to deal with this. An important word for me is also embodiment. How we transfer, how we make resonance happen, how we need to embody what we have to share with the client. And that's an ongoing process. It's never ended. A word that I'm very often using in my practice is unthinkable. Unthinkable, how we get out of our own axis, and we don't realize that. And then, oh my gosh, what's happening? Oh, it could be that easy to walk, to do this movement, and there is something there that we can even not realize, not think of. And that's also why people don't ask for something, because, you know, at my age, what can I change? Or and there is something there very, very important into the integration.
Yeah.
That for me, integration is helping you coming back into your own axis, into your kind of purity. And those layers going from gross, superficial into very subtle. And yeah, that's for me integration, and how you can make it living.
Yeah.
All those dead parts that are closed, and how you can be full of joy and living inside again.
I know that's very helpful, and I would just like to extend an invitation that if you would like to write more about this, whether it's in English or French, and send it to David's email about how you would do that with your words and with your hands, I think that would be very helpful to this group. And so thank you for that. And I'm going to keep moving because we have two other people, if that's okay, to go to Alexander.
Okay, I just have a short comment. I remember the question that was more previously asked, how can be measured the effect of integration session? And I just wonder if it can be visibly measured, that maybe it can be measured in other way. When a person comes to the session and for example, its lower back is muscle tensed, just holding the torso in a fixed position, and I just see that it's constantly tensed. And after the session, person starts moving, and his lower back is muscle they are working now, becoming tensed and relaxed because they are integrated in the movement of this person. Then it can be measured. It becomes either tensed or relaxed and it's synchronized with its movement. And this effect is an integration which can be measured. I just wonder about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And you might have to jump on one of our committees. I like what you spoke to. Our last person is Caitlin, and then we're going to close. So Caitlin, I think you and your cat are on.
Hey everyone, yeah, my puppy just joined me. I'm calling from California, great to be with you all, and thanks to everyone who's done all this important background work for so many months, it sounds like. It's been great to hear from you. I was reminded of a story from my own experience of years ago. Before I became a rolfer, I was a model in an advanced class where Michael Salveson was the teacher, and it was my second or third session, and I had originally come for big toe kind of bunion pain, and they asked me, well, how's your toe? And I was like, oh, it hasn't bothered me. So I had that felt experience of what you were talking about. And I just wanted to say one thing that I was sitting with from being here today was this idea of therapeutic mechanisms layering on top of each other and one triggering another. And that was interesting to me, and I haven't thought about it in that way before, and made me think about sort of a different way of thinking about the onion that's often talked about in rolfing. Peeling away layers and then maybe peeling on layers. And I don't know if this is exactly that, but it also makes me think about something I'll do with clients sometimes, is I'll pick one or two movements based on what I think their system can sort of handle in the session. And then I'll keep asking them to do that movement, maybe with different parts of their body, a similar in and out or up or down or a circle, or in the same part of the body. But I'll sort of ask them to go a little deeper with it and just kind of keep layering, but within a structure they've already become comfortable with. And I think for them it can go deeper within the simplicity of that, and I find that useful. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm so glad that the last three of you guys that popped in shared something from your thought process, because I'm just amazed at how when we get towards the end of a gathering, some great ideas come through, and that just happened for us. So we have to close in 2 minutes, and I don't know about you guys, but I like to keep a time boundary in my practice, so I'm gonna model that here. I do just want to pop up one more time here, though, this image here that the keynote is, the key dates are May 5th, 6th, 7th, 20th, and 21st. But I think more importantly, let's see what happens here. There we go. It looks like a lot of money. I just want to say that. But I think that in terms of your continuing education for yourself in how you articulate, how you connect to other practitioners, and how you might also learn about what it is that they do so that you can go back to your community is a great thing. And those of you that are teachers, round up a crew of people and show up for this, because you might really be surprised at what your students get from this, that we don't even know how they're going to receive the information. So that's it for today. I really appreciate all of you being able to stay the whole time. And for those that didn't get to, that might see the recording later, thank you for being here as long as you could. And we're gonna close, and I'm just gonna wave goodbye to you all now, and thank you for being here.